for joining me today. So welcome to the DigiPass community of practice focused on health and well-being. Here today we're sort of going to be discussing various strategies within health and well-being for students, and I have two guests from the University of Amsterdam here to chat with me, and I was wondering if maybe you could introduce yourselves.
Who starts? You, Jeanette?
I'll start. Yes. Okay. My name is Jeanette Eindhoven. I'm one of the 7 student counselors, central student counselors of the University of Amsterdam. And my focus is international students. And of course, nowadays, yeah, let's say my attic is my world. I go from Pakistan to Finland to Amsterdam to wherever. And that's a lot of joy. I can tell you that kind of brings a bit of joy in these days. So yeah, as a counselor, I take care of a lot of things, and my main focus is talking to students who have problems that prevent them from studying.
Perfect. Well, I'm a colleague of Jeanette's. So we both work in student services, UVA Student Services, which is a centralized department. But I work for the Office of International Student Affairs as a manager, global student experience and engagement. So I work in all kinds of projects dealing with building global learning opportunities and making sure that students get a feasible role in that process as ambassadors or eyes in Amsterdam. And so I get to see a lot of students, and some of those students get into a position where they need support, and then I work with Jeanette to deal with that.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, and so why don't we just jump straight into our chat. I think the first question that I sent you is what do each of you, and I guess maybe Jeanette, I'll direct it at you. So what you think maybe some of the trends and topics are within student health and well-being within the context of the UVA?
Well, if there's one thing that I've noticed is that because health and well-being and social safety has become more important, and not just within the university community, but let's say worldwide, it's a topic that we don't hide anymore. So it means that it's open for discussion, and that means that you, as a university, as a counselor, you can be more open about it. I see more discussions, which is very nice. I mean, we have a diversity office. We're talking about sexual harassment. So the whole Me Too discussion also opened up huge windows of opportunities, also for students to feel safe enough to come and talk to us if there was a problem. And of course, well-being, well, basically, if you're good, if you feel good, then you're able to study. So well-being actually is important in study success. And that's definitely a trend that we're seeing. It used to be, okay, just study hard and you'll manage. And now we're seeing that well-being is part of study success.
That's interesting. And so do you think that, I mean, is that a recent trend that you're seeing, or is that maybe within the past like 2 years or previously? And do you have any thoughts on why you think that's happening?
Well, I think the world is changing. You see, as I said, the whole Me Too discussion has opened up. Why did this happen 2 years ago? Why not 10 years ago? And I was talking to a student yesterday, and all of a sudden and it surprises me sometimes as well. I'm like, okay, didn't think of that. The Black Lives Matter things, you know, she says, I'm worried about my brother who lives in the US. And I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. You know, so there are a lot of things happening. People are opening up. People are not accepting things anymore. And of course, this has always been an issue. It's always been an issue of students who felt discriminated, who were discriminated. Sexual harassment is not new, but it was never something that you would talk about with your, well, maybe with your friends, but not to a counselor, even though everything I talk to students is in private. You know, everything we do is confidential. So it's not that I, you know, blur about it into the world, but it's more acceptable, and it's more accepted that we talk about it. And I think that's, and when you open up for this, that's one thing I've seen at the university since about 2 years. I really got involved in the sexual harassment and how we address that. And especially in a lot of cases, a lot of things that happen, especially when it's outside the university. Of course, it's not legally our responsibility, but it is morally, especially for international students. If you're the only person or the only institution that they can turn to. And what I saw is that a lot of people got involved. And once you do that, and once you start talking to people that this is what you're doing and this is what you would like to do something about, you all of a sudden see students come up to you and say, but this has happened to me and I want to help, or this has happened to me and can you point me in the right direction? Where do I need to go for help?
Mm-hmm.
I think that is something that's definitely a new thing.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like, do you think it's meaning that staff and students are able to have maybe more of a more honest and open relationship? Do you think that it helps them build bridges a little bit better than perhaps they used to, or do you think that that's not the case and that's not changed?
I think that's still very complicated, especially in some fields of study.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that in some parts it's more open. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
the more people are willing to talk about it and not accept it anymore,
Mm-hmm.
the better it will get. But
Mm-hmm.
at the moment, I think in a lot of parts, it's still, let's say your professor is still your professor and he still has to grade your papers. Or if you're in a PhD position, the dependency makes it complicated. It's you know, the whole social safety and social and sexual harassment is something that's complicated, but it's something that we need to open up and have discussions about. And have discussions about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And when dealing with a lot of cultures, it's even worse. Because things that are socially acceptable in one country might be completely not socially accepted in others. And then sometimes students get into conflicts. I sometimes have that. Students who live in the same student dorm, and they fight. They have discussions. Sometimes I get complaints. But then when you start talking to them, it also turns out to be an intercultural thing. You know, so it's also important to make students aware that what they're bringing to the table might be different from what, you know, someone else feels. I had a student once who said, okay, I've stopped hugging people. And in her culture, it was extremely important. And to her personally, it was extremely important. So she felt really lonely.
Oh, yeah.
And she said, but I don't feel I can hug people anymore because a lot of people think, oh, it's weird. And now she's touching me.
Yeah.
Especially in the Netherlands where people only, well, we kiss 3 times, but.
Yeah, yeah.
That's interesting. And I was going to say, Hito, that touches on some of the work that you are really focused on, the idea of balancing this understanding of one's own culture versus the cultures that you are engaging with in perhaps a new place. I wonder maybe what your sort of thoughts are on what Jeanette has said so far.
Yeah, I really recognize a lot of it because we, working in the international office, of course, we've been talking about cultural differences, but it's also a really good platform to just talk about diversity and opening up about that. Usually when I do a session now, I'm telling them I have a hearing disability or disability, the right term for it, differently able. Just recognizing the fact that people can be different and that all those tools that you teach them about dealing with cultural differences also apply to this wide range of other differences that people have, and then teaching them to be open about it and to be more talkative. Jeanette and I, we both play a part in the official welcome for incoming exchange students. And I teach the student organization, ISN, how to present and take the stage and to welcome everyone. And I worked very closely with the president of the student organization, Victoria, to say, well, you can address the whole audience. What is a topic that you feel really personal about? And then she said, well, actually, do you mind if I'm going to talk about mental health? Like, no, of course not. Like, think about how you frame it, talk about it from your personal point of view, but do open up about it. And then she took the stand, and I think for the people from the University of Amsterdam who were sitting there, like, oh, it was quite scary because hey, this is the official welcome, University of Amsterdam, and then she addresses and approaches this really serious topic. But the response she got from the thousands of students that were in that room and afterwards approached, she said, wow, that was powerful. And you opening up about depression and how you tackled that. And it opens up so many more discussions throughout the semester of that exchange experience. So I think, yeah, breaking the stigma, opening up discussions, making it bigger than just cultural differences, also diversity and the mechanism of inclusion. I think that is something that really forms a bond between us two.
That's really interesting. And I'd be maybe, I'm curious as to how, you know, your office, Hito, and your office, Jeanette, how you maybe bridge between your two offices a little bit more, because it seems like there's a really natural overlap and a natural kind of way to work together. But I'd maybe be interested in hearing a little bit more about how you collaborate together and how you do that in a more official way. I don't know, Hito, if you maybe wanted to start the conversation on that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's good to acknowledge the fact that when people address the issues of health and well-being, it can be anyone. It can be a fellow student, it can be a resident assistant in their housing, it can be a study advisor, it can be in my office hours when the meeting is about choosing courses, or directly to Jeanette. And I think this is something that we all have to agree upon, like how do you have that original conversation without, because remember, if it's another student, they might be afraid to have that discussion and might not know how to respond to it. So having that clear and common understanding, okay, what are the issues, how should you respond, and then how should you refer to the other people? And I think Jeanette and I, we did make a clear understanding, like what are the issues that she can deal with and what is my responsibility in my office hours. But I think we both had very similar discussions with our students. And I think in a more common understanding, my focus is, of course, study abroad, studying in Amsterdam, dealing with the more practical matters and issues concerning student exchange. However, dealing with that, you sometimes touch upon something greater than that. And then I refer to Jeanette, like, well, we have a wonderful team of also student psychologists and student counselors who can step in and provide that sense of support and know the resources. Jeanette, how do you look upon this?
Well, yeah, I agree with Guido. And what I like is that we're so close. You know, it's like basically we're down the hall. So sometimes when I have a very practical question, I just run down the hall and say, okay, can someone help me? I have a practical question about the exchange. And I think what I also like is that Guido and his team, that they're the bridge between the University of Amsterdam and the home university. Because sometimes things happen to students and they're so afraid of what might happen. They might not pass classes, or they're afraid what their home university will say. And then Guido and his team can actually, you know, quite, you know, easily and safely discuss the topic with the home university without it, you know, blowing out of proportion. And then the student feels safe. You know, you have to make sure that whatever the student discusses, that it's safe for the student to discuss, and that they feel safe enough to mention it to you. And so that's also, yeah, something that I really treasure. That, you know, there's an external party that can help you sometimes. And you know, and the other thing is, I had a student example that who was on an exchange, decided to stay in Amsterdam, so not go home. And now he wanted to go home, and of course, you can guess, boundaries were closed, so he couldn't go home. And then his lease ended, so he didn't have a place to stay. And he called me and completely, I said, okay, I can manage that. You know, we can see if you can stay a bit longer. And then I said, but have you contacted the Global Exchange Office? And he goes like, why? I said, why? Because they need to know that you're still here. Yeah. Maybe they need to contact your home university. And he goes like, oh, that's a good point. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
That sounds like a great example of making sure that the student is caught. They can slip through many cracks, but doing your best, doing your best to make sure that they don't, you know, if they miss this one check, then they get caught over here, which is good.
Yeah.
And is that something that you found that you've been doing more and more? I mean, it's interesting that you said, you know, kind of just down the hall from one another, because obviously right now we're not just down the hall from one another anymore. We can't be. And so is that something that you found has sort of, how has that changed with, you know, coronavirus and with everybody working from home? And, you know, are you finding that you're working together a lot more frequently than you were before? And what does that actually look like?
What did I tell you yesterday, Jeanette? I haven't seen her in a very long time. This is horrible.
Yeah.
We normally touch base so quickly and frequently down the hall, grabbing a cup of coffee, discussing our certain issues at hand, and now you have to physically create a Zoom call, and I don't know about your load of work and Anna, but it exploded because of COVID-19. So I'm constantly in Zoom calls and not with Jeanette anymore. So this is one of my few moments with Jeanette, and I'm treasuring it.
Yeah, no, he's absolutely right. It's where you normally would run into each other down the hall or at the coffee machine and think, oh yeah, oh, that's something I need to discuss with Guido, see what he thinks, or if there's something going on with students. And now it's so much more complicated. You start emailing and you know, I have way too many emails, and so it's the interesting things that happen when you talk in the attic or in down the hall, the new projects that start, the new ideas you get because you have different ideas and from different perspectives. That is definitely something that is missing in these days.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think collaboration previous to everyone working from home was almost natural. You know, because you're right, you run into people and you have conversations and then things start. And now it needs to be very intentional, but with the amount of additional work that needs to be done due to the pandemic, that intentionality, I mean, that you really have to work hard to make that time, and that time is a lot harder to come by. It seems like, I find for me, you know, my days just, they fly by, and I don't know how they go by so fast. And so the time that I previously had to be maybe a bit more collaborative without just almost like accidental collaboration is not, it's just not so available anymore, which it's been interesting. It's been challenging, I think, but it's also been interesting. I'm not sure, is that something that maybe rings true for both of you as well?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I think the only upside is now that when a student emails me and says, can we make an appointment, is that I'm pretty sure the student is home.
Yeah.
You know, it's
not out clubbing, not we're in home. I know right where you are. Open up the computer, turn on the camera.
That's much easier, you know. I hardly ever have students say, oh, sorry, no, can't make it. No, because I have a prior engagement, you know. Sometimes they say, okay, I have an exam. Okay, yeah. But for most of the times, it's much easier to make appointments with students.
Yeah. And I'd be interested in hearing maybe a little bit more about how you find that your kind of work actually in supporting students when it comes to their health and well-being has changed due to, you know, the coronavirus, and how you're working with students as well. I mean, because I think that we've all found moving into an online sort of forum challenging, as we've just talked about. And, you know, the idea that when you're not sitting down with someone face to face, you can miss sort of those small changes in their demeanor and the things that they say. And I expect that maybe that has really impacted your work. And I'd be interested in hearing you talk a little bit more about what that's looked like, and maybe some strategies that you kind of implemented, and how that has kind of played out in the work that you do.
Well, what I see is that there's a huge need for just a listening ear, someone who's willing to listen to the problems. What I see, I have a lot of meetings with students, and most of them are about stress, anxiety, worried. Students are worried about their parents back home. They can't go home because borders are closed. They have financial problems because the banks are closed. Anxiety about online exams and stuff. So a lot of the times I cannot actually help them. The only thing I can do is listen and put things in perspective. And most of them are extremely grateful, and a lot of them say, okay, you're one of the first person that I've been talking to who actually listens to what I'm saying, which sounds weird because there's so many people at the university, of course, who can listen. But I think a lot of the things what we now do is quite practical. Okay, make sure there are exams online, the classes are online. Do we have, you know, is the connections, is everything okay? Where are students? Instead of listening to what this actually does to students. And you see, when you go online, you read things. One thing we've discovered is that this pandemic, classes online, okay, but the social interaction, the meeting other people, the stress, and that is something we didn't think of. And I think that is definitely something that is important. And keep in mind, as I was saying, well-being is very important when you look at study success. And when students worry about their families, when students worry about, do I still have enough money to pay my rent, then it's hard to study. And then it's good that someone just sits down and listens to you. And I think it's very important that we do that via, something like Zoom, so that you can actually see students. And I must say, it's hard. I have students who cry, and then you're, you're very far away.
And Jeanette, how do you deal with that, like using Zoom? What I found is that just the media format is very difficult. Do you ask them to turn off the camera? Because owning up to a certain issue with like looking at yourself on the camera is highly confrontational. It adds stress. Some people like me, hearing problem, like if there's background noise, it's much more difficult to tune into a conversation. You have the added distraction maybe in your house. It's like invading personal space because I go right into your living room. Like, how do you deal with that in your discussions?
Well, I always ask them to turn on the camera. Most of them do. And then I explain to them that for me, it's important to be able to see them, because I also want them to see me, and they can see that I'm also back home. I'm in the attic, and that I'm kind of in the same situation. And that helps, they're realizing that I'm stuck at home as well. And it's important, again, for me to see their faces, to see how they react. And that's what I also tell them. I said, I would like, because that's the closest I can get to you. Most of them understand. I hardly ever have students who say, okay, I don't want to turn on my, it's more that it's a practical thing. The internet or the Wi-Fi or whatever is not working, or they try and do it on their phone, and it's, and what I personally find very hard is when there's a bad connection, and especially when it gets really intense, and then people kind of like freeze, and you go like, no, come on, there's more, and that's very hard for them, but also for me, because you want to help students, you want to listen to them.
And the emotionality of it is also difficult. When you see someone face to face, you get a much better reading of where people are at and how they feel. It's much more difficult to tune in like this online environment. I think that's tricky.
Well, and the funny thing is, my first question now is, are you okay? And where are you? And is your family healthy? So the questions you ask when you meet someone are different. And I must say that most students value the fact that you ask about, their family, about their health, if they're okay, if they're safe. And it's something that's on their mind, especially in the countries where the pandemic is still very much alive.
I was going to say, I wonder if I would imagine that the things that students are talking to you about are just so very different than they were 6 months ago. Or do you find that, there's the conversation about, are you okay? How is your family? Where are you? And then the conversation ends up moving to something, to a topic that you would have seen 6 months ago? Or are you finding that most of the things that students want to talk about are based around the challenges that they're running into because of coronavirus?
Things have changed. When we started in March in the Netherlands, first questions were, okay, do you think I should go home? And I'm like, I don't, can you go home? I could really, and when do you think I should go home? Do you think I should book a flight? And I'm like, all these questions that I have no idea, and students saying, okay, I lost my job. So how can I afford paying my rent? So those were the first questions. And then it kind of got into this, I'm pretty okay. Sometimes they need a bit of help. So the middle, part was okay. And what you see now is students in complete stress.
Hmm.
They have their exams, they're failing their classes, they need to worry about next year. Am I going to stay at home? Am I going home? Doing the first semester online? Do I have enough money? How do I pay my tuition fee? All these things. I was supposed to go on exchange, and now I can't. So what do I do? What classes can I take? And can I still go on exchange next year? All of a sudden, the next academic year is hitting them.
Mm-hmm.
And when I talk to them about their study stress and how to cope, I always address, okay, so but what are you going to do next year? Because the first semester is still online.
Yeah.
So things are not different. And if you have crappy internet right now, you will have that in October as well.
Yeah.
And I actually had a student yesterday who at a certain point said she was really affected by this whole pandemic. I mean, especially psychologically, she was a mess.
Mm.
And at a certain point she said, maybe I should take a gap year. And I said, well, maybe that's a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not gone yet. And if you're so worried and if you're afraid to come back to Amsterdam or to go to Amsterdam and to go out shopping, to go to class,
Mm-hmm. I think
those are the things. Yeah, those are the things that you see now. Students who are worried about the future.
Yeah, I was going to say, I wonder if part of it is the idea that they have been existing in such a high stress environment for such a lengthy period of time, that you can, I imagine that emotionally and mentally, there's this idea that they can put up with the situation that they're in for only so long, and then it becomes really actually quite difficult, and then maybe that's when the conversation starts that maybe it is time to take a break next year. And what are your thoughts on that? Have you been seeing that?
Yes, and I think what happens is, and maybe we all had that when this whole thing started, especially people are like, okay, in a month's time we'll be back at work. And then it turned out to be, okay, it's until summer. Okay. And again, being at home for a while is okay, but the longer it takes, the more stressful it gets, especially if you have no clue, there's no interaction. So they don't, normally you would go to class and you would see your fellow students and you would think, okay, I'm further ahead. I understand the topic. They don't, or I have no idea what these people are talking about. I need help. And now you kind of have to figure out that one yourself. And then at the point got to where, okay, first semester is online. And then you think, what? But okay, so it's not a few weeks, it's not a few months, it's much longer.
Yeah.
And there's no escape to it.
Yeah.
No.
And normally you would have sports and friends and then university life and all these different facets of life. So when one part goes wrong or is more challenging, you can go to the other parts and have a bit of an escape from that. But COVID, it's you see it in your friend circle, with your family, and university, the sports, because you can't go to the gym. So it's everywhere, and you really saw this heightened level of stress and constant worry. I had many students in our office hours saying to me like they don't want to watch the news anymore because it was too negative, and like constant negative feed of information was really causing a lot of stress. And it's difficult because it is not gone, and we don't know like when the second wave might hit. So there's still a lot of uncertainty. So you need to build resilience, and we do things with resilience in student services. We have, Jeanette and I were both trainers, and we train on different topics, and resilience is fine, but you need to build that from small steps. And COVID was quite a big push to come back from, to spring back from. So that's not how you build resilience in such a big push.
Being pushed off a cliff into resilience.
Exactly, yeah. Oh, you're still alive. Oh, good for you.
Yeah, and it's not like we had the answers. Like, okay, do you think I should go home? We're like, you know. And I had students who actually talked to me and said, okay, I feel so sorry for you. And I'm like, okay, why? Because you're in the Netherlands. And that's where the cultural thing hits again. For us, we you know, this is how apparently the Dutch people deal with this. But in a lot of countries, they deal with it in a completely different way. And I think looking at this whole pandemic, you see how different countries, how different cultures deal with it. And that you sometimes have to explain how we do things in the Netherlands.
Yeah. And I suppose then that would be how it relates back to the work that you're doing, you know, with the intercultural and it kind of comes full circle a little bit in supporting the students, but then also helping them understand that it's maybe a bit of a different culture and that it's dealing with things differently, and that requires support.
Yeah, and understanding. Some of these perspectives are not easy. I think the Dutch approach was to build group immunity. That's not a way forward. When partner universities come to you, it's like, hey, aren't you there to safeguard the safety of our students? We don't want them to get infected with COVID. It's like, no, we don't want them as well. This is just our prime minister saying that something stupid. So it's challenging, but combining all these different perspectives and telling students what our approach is and explaining it. And it was challenging the last couple of months.
I imagine. And I wonder then, because I expect that maybe there's a bit of a correlation between the work that you do, you know, and then the work that you do, Jeanette, because the decisions I expect when it comes to students who are going on exchange, who are coming in, they're coming from your office, Hito, but then maybe the reaction and the results of some of those choices and those decisions, those impacts are shown in the student support that you're doing, Jeanette. Do you think that that's the case? Have you seen maybe a correlation between the two?
Yeah, although I must say that I think Guido and his team did a wonderful job. I hardly had any exchange students contact me, except if they were stuck at the airport and all of a sudden planes were not going, or they didn't have housing and things like that. But so I think a compliment definitely in how they handled that.
That's great.
Yeah, and so I've seen more fee-paying students, because then the financial thing hits, you know, how do I pay my tuition fee? I now see more students contacting me who saying, okay, I thought I was going on exchange. And so what does my future look like? How do I do this? Are you sure I can, are you absolutely sure I cannot go to Australia? And I'm absolutely sure you cannot go to Australia. Do you think I can get a visa and that the university will then still allow me to go? I said, okay, you cannot go to Australia. So it's, it's their future. It's their future, you know, and the whole exchange thing is such a huge part of their academic career. It's something that helps you, that stays with you for the rest of your life. And then if all of a sudden you can't go, or you know, the students who were here in last semester, who all of a sudden had to break off their exchange and go home. So they got this hard decision saying, okay, am I staying in Amsterdam, stuck in my room, or am I going home? And I had a student who all of a sudden was in student housing, and I said, so who's still there? And he goes like, no one. I'm all by myself. And I thought, okay, that's not good. So I actually contacted the housing organization where he was renting from. I said, okay, you guys need to do something. The international student stuck in his room and he has no one to talk to. And they picked it up straight away. So they started organizing online events. But you know, those are things that happen.
And things that I imagine at this point last year, you would never predict happening. You know, you have to very much think on your feet, I think, with this, with the pandemic, because whoever could have predicted this? Who would have thought that at one point there would be one student all alone in student accommodation? I mean, that's almost ridiculous. Like, I can't even imagine that ever happening. And yet here we are. And it doesn't seem so ridiculous anymore.
Unprecedented. We put it in all of our emails, and still when you think back about it, it's like, no. What have we done this year? What actually happened? This is real. It was so crazy.
And it still changes, you know, every day is different. Every time by the end of the day, you think, okay, I've resolved this. And then the next day comes and things are different again. And you go like, okay, I thought we just solved this problem.
Yeah.
You know?
And then another day, new problem.
Yeah.
And the luck is like, I'm very lucky to have Jeanette there because yes, we deal with like hundreds of students and in an exchange program. So it's their contained bubble. And when something like a crisis occurs, you deal with the right amount of people to help most of them navigate that issue and not be severely impacted. And only few of them, that problem is so big, it goes beyond the scope of a partner university and then we definitely need the help of Jeanette. Jeanette should not be approached by 600 students because then she doesn't have office hours no more. So we really have to be a buffer to only navigate those really difficult, challenging cases to Jeanette, and she deals with them wonderfully. I mean, every time I hear back, and this is a major concern because everyone working in exchange is highly committed to the cause, and you get to know these students, you deal with them for a year, maybe a year and a half. So it really hits you personally, and you really would like to see their issue solved. And every time I hear back from Jeanette how it was solved, and it might take a while, but it's always done in a very professional way. So compliments to you as well, Jeanette.
Oh,
that's fantastic. That's fantastic, and it sounds like the kind of the collaboration and the communication is working incredibly well, because you're right. I mean, it needs to be a dual support from both sides, I think, for it to work really, really well. Actually, I was wondering, and I mean, this is just sort of a bit of an aside, but do you think that there's going to be a knock-on effect for student support when it comes to this? Because I mean, as of right now, you're dealing with the immediate challenges. And I wonder if you think that there's going to be a reaction to work with students to help them build more resilience, or, you know, the problems that students come to you with are going to come back to coronavirus maybe next year or even the year after. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that will happen, or do you think that that's something that may not be so something that comes back?
No, definitely.
Oh, definitely. I mean, if we think we're busy now, I mean, I'm actually dreading the fall semester, because I think all of a sudden people are, you know, everything starts, they realize things, or some of them actually got ill themselves and have all kinds of other support they need, financial. So now it's going to be much worse before it gets better. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But in terms of your toolkits, that really expanded into that whole virtual realm. I think everything we're doing now increases the accessibility to our services. Yeah. All of our training sessions are going to be offered online, going to be taped where possible, and then posted on our digital environment. And I think that is also the added effect of this. It's a learning curve. Anna, Edinburgh and Amsterdam, we're in a couple of projects about virtual mobility, and there's a lot of focus on that, but not just the virtual part, not just the remote teaching. It's also about how is it embedded in support services, like what is the learning development curve of it. How do you really create something that is normally a physical exchange in the physical office hours and support services to the virtual? How do you translate those services? And we're doing that now in a very experimental, quick way. I think very successful. I think I didn't hear back too many complaints. So that's going well. And that's going to be added to our whole arsenal of tools that we already had before COVID.
And I think that this will probably stay, you know, meeting with students online, especially students who get really ill and are not capable of coming to the university. So I think part of my office hours will be stay online, because it's much easier, and we're getting used to this. So it's, as Guido was saying, it's becoming part of. And I remember a couple of years ago, I was one of the first ones who did webinars for the University of Amsterdam.
Oh, okay.
And now everyone's doing things online. You know? So everyone who got
You
really
were
afraid.
pioneers
Like,
in
oh,
it, and now
webinars,
everyone's doing it. Yeah. Yeah.
Webinars are so scary. And now, it's the only way to communicate with students
Yeah.
and to meet with large groups. So people are also kind of stepping over their fears and doing it.
Yeah.
Um,
I can imagine that you're a student with caring responsibilities, and then all of a sudden, and you have to make that switch from going to classes to following online classes, and then all of our resources are also accessible online. So then that whole caring responsibility doesn't become like a disadvantage. It's fine. We can just tailor or accommodate that. I think that is the real added value of this whole situation.
It is interesting because I think what used to be a very conservative attitude towards virtual working has quickly shifted so far to a very open and flexible attitude about something maybe that we never, I mean, it's like what you said before, Jeanette, something that things we never thought we could deliver virtually online before are now being delivered virtually as a regularity, as a sort of norm. And I think that will be fantastic as a resource once the kind of the pandemic has passed.
I know.
The idea that I think as of right now, I think for us, it's very easy to just see all of the challenges and the problems that we're running into. But once we come out of this on the other side, the resources that we've created out of necessity are going to be fantastic. I mean, they really will be.
Yeah. And the next step is AI, artificial intelligence. And we're going to save all our resources, and then you're going to put into some computer, and they will do all the work.
Oh goodness.
If only, huh?
Dream on, dream on.
You said it here. You said it first, Guido.
Yes. This is not the real Guido. Guido is like drinking tea in the corner. This is just AI.
Oh,
Yeah,
goodness.
no, I'm still very glad that that I talk to that I'm not stuck behind my computer all day.
Yeah, me too.
So I'm very happy that I still have his physical contact, but then online. So it's, and the funny thing is that when you Zoom with students, without knowing where they are, you can actually see where they are.
Yeah.
There's let's say a Russian house looks completely different than a Korean or a Chinese or a house, and that's really funny to see, and you all of a sudden realize how cultural things are. And if there's one thing I've realized is that I'm very Dutch in everything. But that's also good,
Yeah. It's good. It's a good lesson. I mean, it's good. I think we're all learning, and I think that the really great thing about what you just said as well is in seeing into homes and in seeing to where maybe your students are spending that time, you're also getting a little bit of a glimpse into what their day-to-day experience is, which I imagine is helpful for you, even if it's just a little bit helpful. The idea that you can see what their background looks like and what their, maybe their living room or their bedroom or whatever it is looks like, and that helps you get a bit of an insight into perhaps how they're feeling, mentally and emotionally.
Yeah. Contact.
Students who are in quarantine, and when you go back to South Korea, you have to be quarantined. And I spoke to this student, and I'm like, so where are you? And she just, oh yeah, but I'm stuck in quarantine. I couldn't stay with my parents, so I'm in this room. And I'm like, okay. And it was a tiny room, and she couldn't cook her own dinner. She couldn't prepare her own meals, so her family would bring her meals every day. And I said, so how do you study? She goes like, yeah, I try. And like, okay, that's not a good thing, but and it's good to hear, as you were saying, it's good to see where they are, because those are, even if they don't mention it, there's still body language that you can sense things. And I always report back to the faculties or to my colleagues and say, okay, this is what I'm seeing. And this is what I experience. So this is something we have to be careful about, and make sure that we have eyes and ears and take care of that part of the well-being. I mean, again, we can do the practical thing. We have classes online, exams, and everything's okay, but there's more to it.
Yeah, they do have a life. I've been talking about people creating this virtual mobility program. It's like, oh, and we've got classes, and we're going to ask International Student Network to provide hours and hours of social lives. Like, did you ever sit down with students, like how much time they actually want to spend on their computers?
Yeah.
They have a physical life behind the laptop as well. Like,
Yeah.
think about the context of things, and it's good that you see that context when you are in a Zoom call with them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, and it's been really fantastic to kind of spend the last, I guess we've been chatting for about 45 minutes, chatting, I mean, hearing about what the UVA is doing and how, your two offices are integrating. And Jeanette, it's been really interesting to hear what your thoughts are on kind of student support and how that's changed and what that looks like now. And I suppose, I guess before we finish, is there anything else that either one of you would like to add, or have we missed anything?
No, I'm glad that we have our introduction online and that it's open for all students.
Yeah.
Whereas normally we would have, a limited amount of students. We're trying to organize a lot of things. So we also have a session on, drugs and alcohol and well-being. So we try to make sure that students, even though they start their studies online, or they could, that at least they know what the University of Amsterdam has to offer.
Yeah.
And where they can get help.
Yeah.
Needed.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That really is.
And of course, I hope that Guido can actually welcome a lot of students again soon.
I hope so too. Yes, hopefully semester 2. Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah. Anyways, I just want to thank you both for taking the time to chat with me today. It's much appreciated, and I'm sure that the members of our community of practice will be really interested to hear what you have to say. So thanks so much for all of your thoughts and your wisdom. It's been fantastic.
Thanks for the invite, Anna. It was wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Right.